Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. I want to welcome you all to our third webinar for the fall semester from NECI, the National Extension Climate Initiative. This is the Curriculum Working Group's webinar series, and today's theme is electrification and climate, and you can hear from Brian Stewart, Mark Puhlman, and Sarah Brock from their various different perspectives on electrification. I'm not going to read bios. That's all in the registration information, but we know these people are amazing, and I'm so excited you could join us today. The next slide. So what is the National Extension Climate Initiative? We serve as an anchor for extension professionals, researchers, and partners to collaborate on climate-related issues, share resources, discuss barriers and opportunities for advancing climate change programming in extension, and engage in professional development opportunities. We are 100% voluntary, so if you want to join one of our working groups, this is from the Curriculum Working Group, but there's also the Communications, the Justice, Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity, Professional Development, Partnerships and Policy, and the Evaluation Committee. You can find more at nationalextensionclimateinitiative.net. This is the fourth of the series. We had one on youth and climate in September, 1890 land grant institutions in October, and we have one on resiliency in December. You can find more. I'll put these into the link as soon as I'm off for my part, but you can find it on our seminar series and on the recordings on our YouTube channel. So that is to segue that this will be recorded and uploaded to our webpage around 7 days after the event. Please use the chat for logistics and the Q&A for questions of the speakers. We endeavor to start and stop on time. We will not read bios. We aspire to be a resource of many resources from which you can draw upon for your own regional work. So we hope you find at least one person today that really resonates with you, because we advocate for a new kind of R&D, which is research and duplicate. Just a heads up, this is what will be happening in December. Kim Davis will be talking about building climate resiliency through disaster preparedness. Megan will talk about preparing agents of change for tomorrow in Appalachia. And Jack Voigt, who is an undergraduate student, will be talking about some work that he's been doing for AmeriCorps on filling gaps in coastal communities. I'll put those links in the chat. And then also there is another webinar about efficiency and electrification that's happening on November 19th on Cornell's campus, which has similar and different topics, including pilots working on mobile homes and farm energy audits, among other things. Okay, I think that's it. So I'm going to stop share. So Brian, do you want to launch?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Stewart, and as mentioned by one of the co-founders of Electrify Now, and this whole topic about whether electrification can be thought of as a climate action or a personal benefit is near and dear to me, because it's basically at the heart of what we try to do in our communications. And of course, the short answer is both of these things. But what I'm going to try to do today is just talk to you about my experience with of telling this story now for over 5 years, and what I've learned and what I think is most effective in ways in terms of telling this story. But this sort of like dichotomy between climate action and personal benefit is at the heart of the communications. And one of the things that we have that's fortunate about this story is that because it's both, it means that there's multiple motivations for people to get involved in this once they understand it. There's another dichotomy involved in this, which I think is every bit as important, which is about the kind of interplay between individual action and systems change. If you think back to the origins of the environmental movement in the 70s, if someone was saying, well, what are you going to do personally in order to kind of help protect the planet? Most of the things that we had available to us were about using fewer resources, kind of depriving ourselves in some ways of things that we wanted, like turning your thermostat down or taking a cold shower or something like that. It's about using less of things that are bad. But now we have this whole different paradigm with electrification where your individual actions are accomplishing that, but more importantly, you're sort of disassembling the system that's at the heart of the climate change problem, and you have the potential to be building parts of this new system that should replace it, that promises a better future, and we'll talk about that. All right. The other thing I would like to always keep in mind as I'm having this conversation is that I want to supply context that's both global, because this is a big problem, it's a global problem, but bring it back to a really personal level, and realize that people have different motivations. They might be really motivated by a problem that they're trying to solve, or they might just really feel excited about embracing a solution that looks attractive. Both those things are important. And then, although facts are maligned as a motivator for people to actually take action, I think that it's important to use facts to our advantage and connect them to these more emotional drivers like health and safety and comfort that are equally important in terms of the reasons why people might actually take action. But connecting those things is helpful, and it's a way for us to myth bust, which is important to do without giving too much credence to the myths. And then finally, you can really understand this, but unless you have a good way of taking action, it's not that helpful. So what I like to remind myself is that we need to be able to explain people what these things are that you could do, but also remove barriers for people as much as possible so that it's easy as possible for people to do it, because these things can feel complicated. All right, so just as a starting point, I've really changed my thinking about how to begin this conversation. I used to start with a picture of, the kind of climate change problem. I don't really talk about climate change that much. I really mostly assume people understand it and are somewhat motivated because of their understanding. But I really launch into this from a standpoint of the benefits. And this kind of came from my work with AARP, where, they were kind of reluctant to go too hard on the carbon emission standpoint because it felt political to them. But they were comfortable if I talked about it, as long as I couched it in terms of these benefits that were economic and health benefits to their customers. But I realized that that's just a good way to talk about this. There are huge advantages to doing this as a homeowner in particular, which is our kind of target audience, because it's going to reduce your bills and make a better living experience. But it also reduces air pollution in a really dramatic way, and carbon pollution. So depending on your point of view here, all those things are important. I don't shy away from this one fact, though, which is so important to land, because I don't think people really get it in some ways. In fact, when we started Electrify Now, it was partly out of the frustration that I felt that it seemed like all the popular media just wanted to talk about plastic straws, and there was no conversation in the public media sort of 5 years ago about the importance of energy and the fact that it's at the heart of this problem. I think that's really changed, which is encouraging. But I think people still need to be aware of the fact that it's burning fossil fuels that are at the heart of this problem. Of course, there are other issues, land use, food production, et cetera. I don't mean to downplay them. And plastics waste, again, I'm not poo-pooing that. It's just that if it weren't for this fossil fuels problem, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. And it's also one of the things that's most actionable as a consumer. I like to remind people that on the heat side, there's this mythology that we've all grown up with, that natural gas is a clean burning fuel. But the truth is, the more we learn about it, it's similar or potentially even worse than coal in terms of its climate impacts because of methane leaks. It's a major source of air pollution, which is virtually invisible to people. And it's also true that renewable natural gas, although it's getting a lot of airplay from the utilities, is not going to save the day here. There's no such thing as renewable methane, and it's not equivalent to renewable energy because it still has massive environmental consequences. So the bad news is we have to get off of this thing that we've grown up with and which has been important to building civilization for the last 100 years. But the good news is there's an alternative that is incredibly sustainable and is hugely economically advantageous. The cost of creating new energy with solar and wind is now lower than any other source. And this is true all over the world to varying degrees because of local economics. But on a macro level, this is absolutely the case, which is one of the reasons why we are going to go here. But of course, we need to go here as fast as possible. But this is another story that wouldn't have been true 20 or 30 years ago, would have made this conversation impossible to have. The other thing that's been happening sort of quietly behind the scenes is that electric appliances have become unbelievably more energy efficient in our lifetime. I like to point out these minimum efficiency standards from the US government. So basically, if you look at this, you'll see that gas furnaces and water heaters and all gas technology, they're required by law to be 2% more energy efficient than they were 30 years ago. This technology literally hasn't changed since the time of your parents buying these devices when we were children. But electric devices, and particularly those that can include heat pumps, are by law at least 30% more energy efficient than they were 30 years ago. And in actual fact, if you look at the devices that we buy, they're more like 50 or 60 or 70 or 100% more efficient than the things that we would have been buying 30 years ago. And then this is true for anything that's electric. The electric light bulb is kind of the poster child for this. But these devices that we'll talk about in terms of homeowners in particular, all have massive efficiency benefits that are not possible on the gas side. That is one of the reasons why, if you look at energy consumption in the United States at a macro level, it's essentially unchanged in the last 20 years, even though our population has increased by 18%. We have 51 million more people living here. Our homes are bigger. They're almost twice the size that were being built 20 years ago. There's 15 million heat pumps that didn't exist, 2.5 million EVs consuming electricity that didn't exist. All these data centers that suck up huge amounts of electricity that didn't exist 20 years ago, and all these other devices like smartphones and computers, et cetera. Why is this that our electricity consumption is flat, even though we've added all these consumption? It's because of the efficiency that we're seeing with the electric devices, and this has not played itself out. There is way more efficiency to be gained, which is why I'm not concerned about this soundbite that people say, oh, there's not enough electricity to go around. We need more supply for sure, but it's not as dramatic as people think. And the other thing that is important for people to realize is that while our electricity supply has been relatively constant, the emissions from electricity go down and down and down as we add more renewables all the time and get rid of really polluting coal plants, et cetera. This is why, at a macro level, this story about electrification is so compelling, and why you hear this soundbite that we should be electrifying everything. And we've been sort of talking about it primarily from a climate change perspective, but it has these other benefits that are almost too good to be true. Energy cost savings that we'll talk about. Think about where air pollution comes from. For the most part, it comes from burning fossil fuels. That's the major source of air pollution. It's a huge consumer of water, so we'll have more available fresh water if we get off of fossil fuels production. This all leads to healthier people and a stronger economy. So lots of reasons at the macro level to be excited about this. But I also think it's important to use this context framing and what it means personally, because you can be thinking about that and go, oh, that's great. Well, what about me? Well, in my home, in most people's homes, 60% of the carbon emissions that we're responsible for as individuals comes from burning fossil fuels. And it's actually very possible to eliminate all that, which we'll talk about. Whereas the other 40%, which comes from the food you buy and the things that you purchase, that's harder to get rid of. I mean, takes other people to do that for us, but we can take care of this ourselves. The four biggest ones in most people's lives are their electricity supply, their gas cars, their furnaces, and their water heaters. These are the four biggest sources of carbon pollution for any individual. The only thing that would be on par to this is if you fly a lot, that would be up there. But for most people, these things make everything else pale in comparison from a carbon emission standpoint. And the exciting thing is that when you combine renewable energy and electrification, all these things can go to zero, and it's possible to do this today. You can get renewable energy into your home. There's multiple ways to do that. You can get an EV and charge it with that renewable energy. Now you're creating zero emissions for your transportation. Same for your heating and your water heating. And there's economic benefits to these too that we'll talk about, because when you roll this all up, what you see is that at a household level, the average in the US is about 20 tons of carbon emission. If you electrify that home today with the grid as it is, no renewable energy more than we have already, you would slash those carbon emissions dramatically. But if you add this renewable energy thing, which is possible to do at an individual level, and it's where we're headed as a country. A lot of states have laws now that require this by very near future. This is where we're headed, that this home would go from 20 to 0, and along the way save amazing amounts of money in terms of energy costs. It costs about $7,000 a year to run a home on average. If you think about your electric bill, your gas bill, and the gasoline consumption for 2 cars, which is average, that can be cut in half nearly by electrifying. So, of course, it's important to educate people about the technologies that make that possible, and we're not going to be spending as much time on that today, but this is one of the things that I think is really important for my work, is just to make these things familiar to people, because while they're not necessarily new, most people are not familiar with these technologies that are fundamental to the electrification movement, and that each of them have their own benefits, which you can talk about. It can feel daunting. We like to try to keep it simple for people by showing them how they can clean up their electric supply, and then thinking about all the things in your home that burn fossil fuels, from your lawnmower, which we'll hear more about today. I'm excited. It's one of my pet peeves, all the way to your furnace, et cetera. All those things can be replaced with electric alternatives that are better. You can electrify your transportation. And then, of course, there's a justice component to all this. We have to electrify everyone. We'll be hearing more about that today from another speaker, which is, I like to remind people, that's a certainly important part of this. Okay, so back to this like climate action versus personal benefit thing. If you talk about space heating and heat pumps, the fact is that these devices are going to make you more comfortable. Many homes don't even have air conditioning. It comes along for the ride. In this case, if you replace your furnace with a heat pump, but it also provides more consistent air temperatures that are more well spaced out in your home, so you don't have as many cold spots, et cetera, because it operates at a lower level of energy, but more continuously. And that also means you get better air quality, that more air through your filters, et cetera, that's noticeable in homes that are heated with heat pumps. But from an economic standpoint, it's the cheapest way to heat your home. There's just no other technology that competes with this. The difference between a gas furnace and a heat pump will vary from place to place and home to home. But in general, it is the lowest cost way to heat your home, and by far the lowest carbon pollution. I like to point out to people, because this is another myth, you do not need gas backup. Even in very cold parts of the country, it's possible to electrify homes. Alaska, Maine, it's happening with these new efficient versions of heat pumps that can operate at very low temperatures. And of course, if you have renewable energy in your home, or this is what's going to happen in the future, these devices that are electric will produce no carbon emissions, and that's just not possible to do with the other technologies. A lot of people may say, well, this is a new thing, like, am I going to be like the first person doing this if I do this in my home? And the truth is that Americans are waking up to the fact that electrification is a good thing and heat pumps are just better. This is data about sales of heat pumps in the US, and you can see that 5 years ago, furnaces were massively outselling heat pumps, and that's completely turned around. In 2024, it's more like 60% of sales are heat pumps. So super exciting. If you do this, you're not alone. You're part of this trend that's developing around embracing these technologies. Most people think that they understand electric vehicles. They think they're just expensive and maybe a little bit better, but the truth is they're safer. There's fewer fatalities associated with electric vehicles. They perform better in every way, and they have these dramatic cost savings that make the sticker price that you might be worried about pale or basically go away as an issue when you look at total cost of ownership. Over 5 years, you'll save thousands of dollars. And it's because of this fact. These are 2 cars that are essentially the same cars. One's a gas and the other's electric. And you can see you get, for $10 of fuel, you can go 3 times as far with the electric version. That is why over the lifetime of this car, you're going to save a ton of money, as well as massively reduce your carbon emissions. And of course, all that can be zero if you're charging with renewable energy. And this is why, again, people are waking up to this. And so last year, EVs were about 8% of sales. Here in Oregon, it's more like 17. So you won't be alone if you do this. And I would just finally like to end by saying, I think it's always important to give people idea about resources they can turn to help them to do this in their own home. These are 3 really good ones that I use a lot, but of course it depends on where you live. And then finally, electrification is just better. Yes, it's a powerful climate action. Yes, it's going to give you personal benefits, but it's just better. And that's why more and more people are waking up to this. And by doing this, you can be building your part of a better future. Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have. And I don't know if we have a couple of minutes for questions here. I was trying to talk fast to get through that. There's a lot of material to cover, but I hope.
Brian, what is the most exciting thing for it from your frame of reference about what electrification can do for us?
Well, I think the most exciting thing about it is this sort of no compromise aspect of it, that, you know, because I think people are used to this idea that if you want to do something that's good for the planet, you have to sacrifice somehow. And I think I applaud that idea of living smaller and consuming fewer resources for sure. But I think it's fair to say that that idea has not been successful in the world in general as a solution to our problems. You know, people don't want to sacrifice. So what I love about electrification is it's a little bit of a cake and eat it, your cake and eat it too kind of solution, from the standpoint that it's the most powerful climate action that people can take, period. There is nothing else like it in terms of how much impact it has. And it doesn't really come along with any kind of major sacrifices, and really not really any behavior change. You know, I think that that's the other thing that I talk a lot about, is that people don't like to change your behavior. But, you know, an AEV isn't a behavior change. You're still driving the way you used to. It's just that now you're creating fewer problems by having access to personal mobility. And yes, you can have this whole conversation about, should we be transitioning to more public transportation? Yes, 100%. But it really solves problems that people have in terms of just being able to kind of do what you're doing, but in a way that produces fewer downstream issues.
And so there's a lot of questions now in the chat, and they're all about losing incentives or changes incentives, or maybe an increase in incentives with the new administration. What are your thoughts about how important? So there's many questions.
Yeah.
Thinking from the federal to the state level and the personal and business level, what are your thoughts on, are the incentives necessary? Do we need to rely on them? Do you think they might get bigger? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm as fearful as anyone that, you know, we're going to lose momentum on this that we've sort of gained over the last 5 years with under the Biden administration. I think they just don't get credit for how much they did in an amazing way, that we still won't see the effects of it for years still. But I would say this trend towards electrification started and really started picking up some momentum well before these incentives were available. So I think I'm not fearful of it changing. I'm fearful of it slowing down, and we don't have time for things to slow down. But I also feel like this is a time where the states are going to have to step up and do as much as they can to plug the gap between what may start to deteriorate at the federal level.
Okay, so we need to switch. There are some questions if you want to answer them in the chat. And could you also put the links that you showed on that next to your last slide into the chat as well?
Sure.
Mark, will you please share screen and come on board? And while Mark is doing that, I just want to comment that my 87-year-old mom just bought an EV car because her 22-year-old Corolla was dying, and she was fearful, and it was without incentives. It was a really inexpensive used car, Chevy Bolt, and I'm not trying to advocate for it. I'm just saying there's so many benefits to it. It's one of the most inexpensive cars out there right now, and it happens to be electric, and it happens to run off of the solar on her roof. So I don't know. I'm just saying it's not high tech, scary or expensive. Okay, Mark, take us away.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this topic. My name is Mark Puhlman. I am a board member of the LOSN, which is Lake Oswego Sustainability Network. And I'm going to speak today on our campaign we're calling Electrify Your Landscaping Healthy Yard Care. It's clean, it's quiet, it's healthy. A little bit about LOSN. LOSN is a community-based nonprofit volunteer organization. And we network with nonprofits, businesses in the area, local government, and schools. And our purpose, we've been in existence for about 12 years, and our purpose is to promote sustainability in Lake Oswego. Lake Oswego is a small suburb of Portland, Oregon. Portland has a population of about 630,000, and our population is about 40,000. Um, People are so surprised to find that the utilization of gas-powered lawn equipment or landscape equipment is quite detrimental to our community and to our climate. 1 hour of running a gas-powered lawnmower is equivalent to running 300 miles of a car going from like LA to Vegas. And 1 hour of leaf blower use is the equivalent of driving 1,100 miles or from LA to Denver. That's just absolutely amazing, mind-boggling to my mind, but it does come from the California Air Quality Management Board and is quite believable. And this is smog forming pollutants, all comers. One of the main disadvantages to gas-powered landscape equipment is the extreme noise. Noise created by gas-powered landscaping equipment is about 4 times louder than electric. And when we look at decibel levels of in the environment, it is a logarithmic measurement, which means for every 10 decibels that you go up, it's twice as loud. Most electric landscaping equipment run at a decibel level of about 55 to 75. Most gas-powered landscape equipment run at about 75 and go up to as high as 120. On top of which, the gas-powered landscape equipment has a low-pitched hum or sound that penetrates walls and windows much more efficiently than the higher pitched sounds do, and can affect up to 90 homes. Whereas electric equipment, it does have some low pitched sound, but it can affect maybe six homes. A decibel level above 85 can be harmful when exposed to that over approximately 15 minutes. So OSHA, EPA have put levels at which unprotected ears should not be exposed to decibel levels, and you can see that down at the bottom. Gas-powered landscape equipment exude a lot of toxins. Volatile organic compounds like benzene, butane, formaldehyde, and also a very dangerous particulate matter, small particulates called hydrocarbon PM 2.5. That's the size. Electric landscaping equipment doesn't exude any of that. When using the gas-powered or blowers in and of themselves, they do stir up dust and fecal matter and other stuff that's on the ground. And we'll talk a little bit about how to avoid that in the future. Looking at comparing gas and electric landscaping equipment. Electric, it's instant on and off. Gas, you got to pull a cord. For starting the engine, you have to often we'll have to prime it. You have to refill the gas and oil. You got to transport the gas. You got to fill the gas cans and transport them, often in your car, so it sloshes around in the car and with all the smell and in there. Whereas you don't have to do any of that with electric. You do have to charge batteries and transport those batteries, but you don't have to winterize your equipment with electric landscaping. Whereas if you don't winterize your gas powered, you're going to have a gummy mess in the springtime and going to have you're going to have a big bill cleaning it up. Annual maintenance of spark plug changes, air filter changes, fuel filter changes are all gone with the electric landscape equipment. Multiple tools can be run on the same battery, so you don't have to buy separate batteries for the different equipment. And batteries are becoming longer and longer as far as their run times go. I personally changed my gas-powered lawn equipment to electric several years ago, and I absolutely love my lawnmower. It's lighter. You turn it on, you turn it off. There's no smell, no gases that come out and you have to deal with. It's easier to push. It's all in all a plus for your landscaping equipment. Now you'll hear that they aren't powerful enough for our landscapers, for our industrial landscapers. Unfortunately, many companies are creating powerful electric equipment, anywhere from Ego to Steel to Makita. And these have all been field tested by AGZA, which is the American Green Zone Alliance, and are certified for our landscapers for their use. Now, another comment is that the purchase price of the electric equipment is higher than the gas, and that is true. Just like we were talking about EVs being more expensive than the gas-powered models at this point, although they are going to be lower. However, you'll note that when looking at this is just one brand, Steel. The Steel BR500 is a gas-powered blower, and the Steel BGA 200 is an electric. And you'll notice that the CFM is almost identical. You get a little less wind speed out of the electric than you do from the gas, but very, very minimal differences. But again, people say that they are too expensive to replace and operate. When looking at the economics of replacing gas blowers with electric blowers, we take one example here of an electric blower that costs about $2,000, and we'll give the landscaper the benefit of the doubt that they have a gas-powered blower now, and they're going to replace it with electric. So they put out $2,000 at the beginning, but in 10 and a half months, you will find that the electricity, hold on one second here, let me get my pointer out. Yes. You'll note here that the Steel 500 costs $600, and the electric blower costs $2,200. Oh my goodness. Okay. But then you look over the cost over 5 years. You're going to save a heck of a lot of money with the electric. It costs about $13,000 for your gas, your gas and your oil, whereas the electric. Sorry about that. The electric, this includes your electricity. So annualized cost is about $500 for $600 for your electric, and $2,700 for your gas. So over 10 and a half months, you've actually paid for your electric blower, and savings of about $2,500 a year. Another penciling out of costs. We have a blower that costs $2,500 here, and we have a gas blower that costs $530. 2-year fuel cost, running at 1,920 hours for which is 4 days a week, 4 hours a day. With your electricity, costs about $384 versus the gas and the oil and the like, $5,600. So ultimately, over 2 years, you're spending twice as much with your gas blower than you are with your electric. So the next problem is that they say is the upfront costs are too high, so we're going to put our small business owners out of business. So what we need to do is we need to look at some sort of a financing situation. We know that equipment is not paid for up front, all at once out of pocket. It's usually financed over time. So what we need to do is we need to take a look at loans, perhaps for our small business people. Small Business Administration has microloans. We have in Oregon, we have a new loaning situation where we are making microloans to landscapers and for individuals who are winterizing their homes. And we're looking to use that in our small community too. We also need to look at community grants for the small landscapers. And we also know that large retailers such as steel often will give interest-free purchases and payments over the course of time. And as you can see, you pay for it with the savings. But people say, oh, they're still too expensive. I can't do that. What is the cost of inaction, the human cost? These things expel toxins, which can cause cancer, pulmonary disease, heart disease. The decibel level of these things cause hearing loss, and we just don't want to tolerate that. So what can we do as individuals and as groups to alleviate this problem? One is that we can simply not use blowers. We can use brooms and rakes. We can buy electric tools, which are affordable. As you've seen, they're affordable, clean, and effective. We can hire landscapers in our area. A lot of people have landscapers, and so we can hire landscapers who use electric tools. One of those, we have a list, and we've worked with Quiet Clean PDX to create a list of landscapers who use only electric equipment. And it's very difficult to get into them because they're filling up. We can also buy our own electric tools at our home and loan them to the landscaper, so the landscaper gives us the labor and we give them the tools to do the work in our particular home. We can also purchase batteries to charge at our home, and then they can own the equipment and just change out the batteries as they come. We can also care for our plants. The Xerces Society has a campaign for leaving the leaves because they care for our soil and plants. We want to avoid herbicides and pesticides, which can be harmful to our children, pets, and wildlife. And we can leave these leaves, which actually builds the soil, builds mulch. We clean the hardscapes, but leave the leaves in the planters. You can also take action and become involved in local and national groups that are working toward a better, cleaner home life. We have the Xerces Society and the Leave the Leaves. We've talked about that. You can certified habitat, backyard habitat can certify your backyard for renewable and sustainable yard care. And we've created a gas-free landscape program here in Lake Oswego. We also have electrification fair. We had an electrification fair and encourage the use of rakes and brooms. We call it the sound of silence. And we've also created a community action group, which we're doing letters to the editor on an ongoing basis. We're forwarding those letters to the city council. We have Electrify Your Landscaping and Healthy Yard Care Committee within LOSN. And we ask for donations from the local area. And we also have our signs that we would like people to put up. We've also worked with other groups in the area. Watershed Council, Lake Oswego Watershed Council has a urban forest tree summit that we just participated in. We also invited to our electrification fair both landscapers who utilize electric tools and also electric tool manufacturers. We have a sustainability fair within Lake Oswego also. And if you'd like to know more information, here's our website. We're Lake Oswego Sustainability Network. And any questions?
That was wonderful, Mark. So I'm just curious, Mark, what is your favorite difference from using an electric landscaping equipment as opposed to gas powered? Like, what is your favorite, like, what's the nicest thing about it?
I like the instant on and off, and not having to manage the gas through the winter. Our usage drops at our home in the wintertime, of course, and even utilizing Stabil in the gas really didn't help. We always were all gummed up, and it was always a mess, and it smells.
So Sarah, will you start sharing? And I'll ask one more question of you, Mark. Can you just talk about a little bit how you're advocating for the landscaping businesses to move over to electric equipment? Because I have to say, I live in an apartment building and I notice a big difference between electric landscaping and gas-powered landscaping equipment around me.
Well, we're actually going to the end user. We're going to people who are hiring the landscapers and encouraging them to go to electric landscapers. Then we've reached out to landscapers in general, find out if they have the option for electric, and then we put it on our website. We're also beginning to work with Seeds for Soul, which is a funding, a low interest funding group and we're just beginning that process, and we'll probably work on that next year, bringing the community together to kind of adopt a landscaper, so to speak. We'll donate some funds. We'll ask the city to donate funds, and then we'll get some micro loans. And between the three of them, be able to help the low income, small landscapers weather the storm.
Okay, I just want to say that I'm going to put into the chat a cost comparison that NYSERDA has done for greenhouse gas emissions and the cost for different kinds of equipment. You kind of have to go onto the second tab of the first link, like it's going to download an Excel spreadsheet, but it's really helpful.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark.
Would you like me to take it away, Jenny?
Please.
Great. Hi, everyone. Last speaker of the session for you. My name is Sarah Brock. I run a program in New Hampshire that we call the Energy Circuit Riders program, and I'm going to explain what that is. It's a way through which we are trying to help funds and action get into our more rural communities. In New Hampshire, we are a fairly rural state. And part of the reason I'm here is because Jenny's mom is on one of the energy committees I work with in rural New Hampshire. So happy to represent the Northeast here. Just a second. So Clean Energy New Hampshire is a nonprofit. We are striving towards a decarbonized energy system for New Hampshire. For us, that means that we work on anything related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and electrification. We have a North Star that relates to equity. We haven't talked a lot about that today, but the three sentences that are run through my mind all the time are these guiding principles that rates and costs must be affordable for all, that the system should distribute the burdens and benefits, economic and environmental burdens and benefits fairly, and that the energy system should be secure and resilient and reliable. I run our education outreach technical assistance side. That's our energy circuit rider team. We also do a lot in policy advocacy and stakeholder engagement. And we have a whole lot of members across the state, individuals, industry members, municipalities, planners. And we are a relatively small state, and we sort of are the organization focused on this, that we don't have many other peers. My team, the Circuit Rider team, provides direct hands-on technical assistance to communities. This is a program that started in the North Country of New Hampshire. You can see Melissa here, who's our original Circuit Rider. The concept was that a lot of the communities, particularly in our northern region, are very small. We're talking like 500 residents or 1,000 or 1,500 residents, a 3-member volunteer select board running the town, and maybe a part-time administrator opening the mail and processing taxes. So no capacity to help the town put LEDs in town hall or consider a solar project or any of those other projects that we were seeing some of the more populated towns be able to tackle. So we got some grant funding. We hired someone to be a traveling staffer who could provide some expertise and some project management support. And that was incredibly successful. We managed to expand that to 4 municipally focused circuit riders that are each live and work in their region. So you can see the North Country, we call the Seacoast in the southeast, and then a couple of those counties in the southwest now each have someone on the ground working out of their home that is going to select board meetings and planning board meetings and creating energy committees and trying to get projects done that save money for the town and therefore trickles down into the tax base. The concept here in the work that we do, which started with municipalities and as you'll see has grown, really has to do with the rural nature of our state. We experience some of the highest energy burden in the nation because we don't have access to natural gas. We're very reliant on oil and propane to heat our homes. And cold climates mean heat pumps were slow to take off, although we are certainly seeing a lot more adoption of heat pumps for primary heating now, which I'm thrilled about. We also just have very small communities, which means at the municipal level, very little capacity to get projects done, but also very little capacity to get the word out about programs that could help residents to take action. And we see programs rolled out in the state that just don't get beyond a couple of populated centers in our state. So our team effectively is bridge. We identify what the programs are, we develop the technical expertise and capacity internally, and then we're translating and supporting our partners through these projects. Briefly, because you're not here to talk about municipal energy projects necessarily, my team is trained to do sort of anything and everything that's necessary to support a town through the process of identifying and then having the voters approve an energy saving project. And a lot of those projects do have to do with electrification in some way, whether we are shifting their electrical source to solar, and that happens a lot. Putting solar on the town hall or on the covered landfill sort of thing. A lot of efficiency projects, a lot of increasing number of electric vehicle procurement and electric vehicle charging projects, but a lot of talk about electrification. I'll breeze through this, but you can see sort of a glimpse of the kinds of things that we have touched. We also work with small businesses. This is relatively new. We got a grant from USDA to provide technical assistance for businesses who could be eligible for the Renewable Energy for America program, one of those. It's a program that allows small businesses and ag producers in rural parts of the country, which is most of my state, to access currently 50% of project cost for renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. So we are out talking to business owners every day, helping them navigate the process, both of applying for the grant, but then also just putting the project together generally. And we deal with the same capacity issues where these are small business owners who do not have the time of day to go researching and getting contracts with contractors, and we're able to hold their hand through the process. And here's just another spattering of the kinds of projects that we've been working on. When it comes to helping, so the Inflation Reduction Act was obviously game changing for a lot of reasons. I'm not going to talk about this, but one of the most impactful from our work has been the elective pay program, which for those of you who don't work with municipalities or nonprofits, this allowed agencies like municipalities and nonprofits that don't have tax burden to still access the clean energy tax credits through a direct payment from the IRS. That has meant that our communities and our nonprofits have access to an unlimited funding source that's non-competitive to help move projects along, and that has been game changing. There have been a number of other programs and funding, often linking back to the IRA, that part of my organization's mission is to make sure that dollars land on the ground in New Hampshire. Some of our neighboring states have state agencies and like federal funding czars whose job it is to make sure that all federal funding that could land in the state does. We don't have that in New Hampshire for various funny political reasons. So my organization sort of tries to do that as best we can. When these funding sources come across, we're analyzing what is it, who's eligible, do they know they're eligible, what needs to happen, and what kind of technical assistance do we need to deploy on the ground to make sure those dollars land in the hands of the folks who are meant to receive them. And looking into the next year, I cannot speak to whether this is going to change per last week's election results, but in New Hampshire, we've been anxiously awaiting our state Department of Energy's program to deploy the home electrification and appliance rebates. This is something that's a nationwide program, but every state has been asked to come up with their own plan to deploy it. In New Hampshire, this is going to mean, I was just looking up the dollars, this is going to mean somewhere around $70 million landing in our state, which is a lot, that will go directly to residents, individual end users. And some of that is specific to electrification. And I think the part that my team is most excited about is rebates that will help purchase heat pumps and other, all of the appliances you heard Brian talking about earlier. There will be significant rebates for on a level that we haven't seen. That combined with a couple of other incentive programs that are coming down the pike in New England should make it possible for us to go out and be delivering this electrification message that we heard Brian share. We don't really have the structure to do that well in New Hampshire in these rural communities. So we have been working with our energy committees and our local partners to think about when this lands, how do we make sure that these programs, which are designed to be utilized by low-income residents, actually can we get those programs to those low-income residents and hold them through their hands through the process of actually utilizing them, because we know from history that these programs are difficult to deploy effectively in the populations that you want them to reach. So we're thinking a lot about that proactively. Some of what we are doing right now, we have a funding tracker that we track with our partners as these programs come up. We are researching them and trying to identify who needs to know about them and who needs to go after them as a coalition. We have worked with statewide partners to make sure that when the partners in the state go after federal funding, that often it's ending up that my program is being tapped to as a write-in, so that not only is the program being applied for, but there's some money being set aside for technical assistance as part of the program rollout plan, because we know that that's necessary in New Hampshire for these programs to be successful. We are really advocating with our communities to have shovel-ready projects to put together. So that means figure out where in town the EV charger is going to go, because you don't know when the grant program could land that would make money available to help you implement that. But usually when grant programs are announced for communities, there's a 6 or 8 week turnaround, which is not enough time for most small municipalities to come up with the idea, get a contract with a vendor, and put together a complicated federal grant proposal. So we're supporting communities in developing folders of shovel-ready projects so that they're ready to jump. We are forming and strengthening local volunteer energy committees and commissions, which is a model that's very common in the Northeast, where we have, elected in New England, we have these select boards that are elected in most towns, and the select boards can appoint energy committees of volunteers who then can go off and do the busy work of putting together projects to then present to the voters at an annual town meeting. So we create these committees, we support them, we help them do their homework for their select boards and their voters. We help those committees set up capital reserve funds so they don't have to wait till the next town meeting necessarily to take action on a clean energy project. These are all somewhat unique rural New England problems, but we're actively working proactively to address them. And then we're also doing some kind of creative organizing on the ground. We've been working with some of our local partners and a local utility here to look at bringing batteries to local emergency shelters in some of our hill towns where we can have prolonged outages, and we put solar on these roofs, and can we maybe rely on batteries instead of diesel to provide backup power. We've started working with local libraries as hubs for information around electrification. The libraries are very interested. They see this as a way to have more reasons for people to come in the door, but they need partners because they are not experts in this. So we're working with some libraries right now to see what kind of programming we can help them run to get the word out about programs and electrification opportunities. We've got some towns piloting a coaches project. Rewiring America runs a coaching training, and we've got some volunteers who have gone through that training, and we've got a growing list of residents who have done some electrification on their own and are willing and excited about talking to their neighbors about it. So we're standing up a program that's doing some matchmaking in that regard, and if that goes well, that's something we're hoping to scale. We've been doing coordinated public outreach campaigns in various communities for years. The energy committee that Jenny's mom is part of has done a lot of solarize and weatherize campaigns with my help in the past, and it's a model that we found really successful. And we've been doing more work with resident-owned communities, which are mobile home communities in New Hampshire. We have a lot of those communities that are owned by their residents and are increasingly looking at community solar projects and electrification across their communities. And we've got some grants to help with that. So we're getting creative to get these programs and these solutions out into the hands of people who need them. Takes a lot of coordination and effort and thoughtfulness at the local level, in my experience, but there's a lot that can be done. I'll leave it at that.
Sarah, thank you so much. I just admire your program so very much. You are connecting the dots in ways that are so important. And as we think, and especially for rural communities, because New Hampshire, like the whole state, is like 1 million people. So you have a specific kind of place-based learning, collaboration, and integration to connect the dots for funding and implementation. So how can other places think about what you're doing? How can they research and duplicate what you're doing in order to meet, in Florida, they'll have different kinds of problems. In Oregon, they'll have different problems. In Iowa, they'll have different problems. Like, I just feel like you're connecting the dots in important ways. How can we follow or be inspired, or like,
Yeah.
how has it come together in your head to make these kinds of things connect?
I mean, I think everything that I'm working on started with the question of what do we want to see and why isn't it happening? The Circuit Rider program was created because someone looked at these little towns in the North Country and said, none of these towns has switched out their streetlights for LEDs. Why? Because it makes perfect financial sense, and it was just the capacity. And so we identified the problem, and we tried it out. We plugged the hole in a teeny little pilot. It worked, and so we expanded it. The solarize and weatherize programs were the same thing. Why is there we got data from the state, and it said that nobody on the Connecticut River was subscribing to the New Hampshire Saves program. Why? And so we put together a program, and we talked to the installers who were wanting to do business there, and we talked to the NH Saves folks, and we put together a program, and we changed the narrative. And I think wherever you are in the country, surely you have one of those, why isn't this happening? And get the people around the table who've got a perspective on it, including the folks you're trying to reach, and come up with a solution that's worth trying at a scale that's possible to try.
David, will you come on and ask your question?
Sure, thanks, Jenny. And thank you, Sarah, and also Brian and Mark. My question, speaking as a member of the National Extension Climate Initiative, which is sponsoring this and represents the resources of the land-grant university system, broadly speaking, what can we in the sort of bridging organization between community and academy and the academy, what can we do better that would help the work that you're doing in places on the ground more effectively? And I'm also just curious whether any of you already have connections with cooperative extension people in your communities.
I'll just note briefly that in New Hampshire, our extension runs a nature groupie program that I just love. It's a volunteer matchmaking program, and I've talked to them at length recently about whether some of what they're doing to try to tap volunteerism toward the end of conservation in their case couldn't be sort of mirrored or dovetailed with the idea of developing some sort of coaching program or volunteering program around electrification and helping people access electrification resources. And that, I think there's more to be looked at there. That's one area where we're seeing connection.
In Lake Oswego in LOSN, we are connecting with state and national groups. We have an electrification action committee that we're connecting with Electrify now and creating a coaching electrification coaching group to help people electrify.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm pretty unfamiliar with this extension kind of concept and how we might work better with them. But I like the idea, and I love the fact that, you know, it feels like it's kind of embedded in communities all over the country, which is such an important thing. I think everyone here has been touching the speakers on this kind of local action idea that, and, you know, the way local action works is by connecting well with the communities, like Sarah spoke to that very eloquently. I mean, without people on the ground, you can have the best programs in the world and they won't get any traction. So I don't know, maybe I would love to explore it more. I'd like to talk to you maybe and others more about what that might look like, because I'm pretty unfamiliar with what that extension program is. This is
I just sent you a chat with my email address. We can
okay.
Follow up and anybody else is welcome as well.
So Colin has one question. New York State has some similar programs called the Regional Clean Energy Hubs with a link. We have found that there's generally good awareness for various energy and cost savings programs, but low participation. What has been your program's best practices for moving someone from awareness to action? What's more important, education and outreach, or program design and incentive structure, ...
Every time I've asked that question, Colin, it tends to be in a room, and I always like to have the contractors there and the program leader people, design people there, and ideally some just humans who fit in that category of maybe the audience. And then we just map it out, start to finish, the path from awareness to action, and every little place on that path where you could fall off or where something is confusing. And then we design the program to smooth that and have an answer for every moment where it gets confusing. So I mentioned the solarized and weatherized campaigns, but where I've had most success in getting uptick in an actual program, it's when we like hyper analyze the program in that respect and pick a geography and pick some partners and run. And in some of those cases, we were negotiating with the contractors to sweeten the deal a little bit, and have an extra incentive or some discount. And in some cases, we were simply just promoting the program and helping people feel better about participating and giving them a sense of now is the moment, we're all doing it together in my community here. And that's where partnering with the energy committees and doing it a couple communities at a time was very effective. But that skill made sense at the level that we were operating in rural New Hampshire.
I will just add on that the reason I know Sarah is because she worked with my mom's town, which is Cornish, New Hampshire, to have a competition with the neighboring town, which is Plainfield, New Hampshire, to see who could weatherize more. So there had little
Sure.
tickers, like who was winning, who was getting more. And then they did the same thing with solarizing, right? Like who has more solar panels. And what happened was, as each town had incentives, because if the town got to 10 participants, the cost of the weatherization or the solar panels went down. If they got to 20 participants, right, the cost of the solar panels for everybody and for the weatherization went down. And so not only did you get everybody to sort of cajole everybody else in, but you also started getting everybody talking about the issues and finessing the problems and actually making a better product for everyone. And it was fun. I mean, we're talking towns of like 1,400 people. We're not talking about some huge thing. Like one building in New York City has 1,400 people.
Yeah.
And I can't get my building to like even put a solar panel on our roof, right? I mean, it's really hard, but it was so joyful and fun and silly and real. Like I say silly with most endearing means, when I mean real, like it was just so real. And I just put that out there because like Brian said in the beginning, we can take an austerity politic as the only way of getting through this, or we can just improve our air quality, improve our water quality, improve our efficiency and savings, all of these things. Like why are we resisting it? Which is my question ultimately for all of us. But does anybody else want to give their perspective? I totally went off and I shouldn't have, and we are over time, but I feel like this group is rich.
Well, I would love to respond to that, Jennifer, real quickly, because I feel, and someone asked this in one of the Q&As, it's like a lot of things in this space, the upfront cost is often the thing that is the hurt. And that can take many different forms. The upfront cost might be scary when you're comparing it to a lower cost fossil fuel piece of equipment that's going to cost you more over the life of the product, but the upfront cost is lower. That's one impediment. Another impediment is, particularly if you're talking to more of the another version of that, particularly for lower income folks, it's like, wow, like the idea of a new water heater is just like so not in the cards because they're trying to keep food on the table. So those upfront costs just become like completely showstoppers. So I kind of feel like the incentives were one take at this. The IRA, the whole idea of the IRA was that at the very least, it would encourage people to buy more efficient equipment, which is going to be better in the long run. But in the best case scenarios, these more efficient versions of heat pumps and other devices are competitive with gas equipment or fairly close because of those upfront incentives. So that was one way to get at it. But the other way that I just still scratch my head about, like, why this isn't more of a thing is financing. Because if you think about, nobody buys a car with cash. I mean, almost everyone finances their cars when they purchase them. And that's why it's relatively easy to buy these expensive devices, because you're spreading the cost out over time. And it's just weird to me that there isn't more like prevalent examples of that. I think the number of people who actually finance their HVAC equipment is teeny. It's really small. Why is that? It's weird. These things cost almost as much as an automobile, and yet people have to pay cash for them. It's crazy. So that's another frontier I would love to try to crack the code on somehow. Sarah, you probably have more experience with that. But yeah, upfront costs, that's a big hurdle.
Just to underscore the weird aversion to financing, I've been seeing that for a decade, and I think until it can be as easy as on bill, that's where I've started to see. And I used to do some work in Vermont, and Green Mountain Power over there did a great job building some of this into their rate structure, and that's when they really started to see the adoption. But it was years of having great programs through the local banks, just no
Yeah.
uptake.
Yeah.
Could I just also mention, as a resource, there's a really dynamic group of family consumer science educators in Extension that pay attention to household finance. They're not going to solve the problem by creating the new financial tools, but they are a really good group to help people understand what tools do exist that might from the consumer side, make it easier for people to understand the benefits of going this kind of route. So,
Dave, did you put a link on that? Did you say? I'm looking for it.
I don't have it right here yet. I have not put a link, but I will if I can before Jenny shuts us down. So, and if not, I'm going to talk to you anyway. So.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you all so much. This has been a really great tag team of ideation and doing. I hope everybody knows that you can contact me with ideas of things that you want to be presented next, because we are trying very hard to get multiple voices in order to cross-fertilize and innovate as well as implement. So be sure to send me an email, and you can also join NECI. We're all a volunteer crew. And there's many different ways to participate. But more important than joining NECI is figuring out how to make this happen in your own community. So I just want to say thank you so much for our speakers today. You have my heart. This was great. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. The recordings will be online within about 7 days. And I hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.